as it relates to the particular type of ministry that I'm in. I want to call our attention to 1 John chapter 4. That's right before 2 John, right before 3 John in the New Testament. 1 John chapter 4 verses 1 through 6. And I want to read this passage to you and kind of give you a running interpretive commentary as I read it for you as to its meaning. Now, John addresses the Christians in his day as I do you. He says this, "Beloved," that's you, "do not believe every spirit." What does that mean? Don't believe every spirit behind every teacher, every teaching, any doctrine. Don't believe every teaching, but test the spirits or teaching or doctrine to see whether they are from God. Why is that, John? For many false prophets have gone out into the world. And now in verse 2, he comes and gives us a standard of discernment by which we know something is from God and not from God, especially when it comes to the person of who Jesus Christ is. He says, "By this you know the Spirit of God." Every spirit or every teaching, every doctrine, every teacher that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Now what does that mean? Every teacher, every doctrine, every spirit that says that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh is from God. You can take that to the bank. Then he says this, "And every spirit or every teacher or doctrine that does not confess Jesus is not from God." In other words, if a teacher says that Jesus Christ may be a great man or a spirit or an angel, but he's not God, well, that spirit, that teaching is not from God. What does John say about this? He says, "This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and now is in the world already. Little children, you are from God and have overcome them. For he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. Whoever is not from God does not listen to us. By this standard of discernment," he says, "you know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error." Now, I'll be honest with you. Every time I read this passage, I can't help but think that John just wrote that last week. Now, why would I say that? It is because what he was experiencing in his day, you and I have in our day 1,000,000 times over. What was John experiencing in his day? He was experiencing the false teaching of a false prophet and teacher named Cerinthius. Cerinthius basically taught that Jesus Christ was a man that was filled with the Holy Spirit, went to the cross to die, and then the Spirit left him there on the cross just to die as a man, basically for his own sins. Well, that is not the Jesus of the Bible. Now you say, "I believe in Jesus." What do you mean by that? What Jesus do you believe in? Who is Jesus? Jesus, the biblical Jesus, of course, is fully God and fully man. Now, there's a lot of confusion about that, even in our day, many, many times over. Now, the word Antichrist, obviously it means ultimately against Christ, but in this particular context and in our day, it means in place of Christ, instead of Christ. We have a lot of counterfeit Christ today. We have a lot of substitutionaries for Christianity today. Think about Islam. Islam is a perfect replacement for Christianity as far as a works approach to salvation is concerned. The Scripture distinguishes between the bondwoman and the free woman. The bondwoman represented a works approach to salvation. The Muslim is going to get to heaven because he believes that his good deeds will outweigh his bad deeds. And by the skin of his teeth, Allah will allow him to come in. It's very, very interesting, by the way. I take groups of people during the month of Ramadan to a mosque to have discussions with the imam there. And for the last 3 times I have raised the same question and have got 3 different answers on the same question for the last 3 years. I said, Ashfaq Chufi. Middle Eastern guy, but a retired engineer from Birmingham, Alabama Power. And it's very interesting. I said, Ashfaq, my group would like to understand how a Muslim gets to heaven. And he says, well, Allah is merciful, and He looks at the heart whether or not you're really repentant. And deeds play a part in this. I said, Ashfaq, let's cut through the chase here. I said, what part do the recording angels play in Islamic salvation? And I never will forget the expression on his face. He said, oh, you know about that. I said, yes, I do. He said, well, it's good to know who I'm dealing with. And he said, well, this is not metaphoric. It's not symbol. He said, Orthodox Islam teaches that every person who is ever born into the world comes into the world with 2 angels assigned to them. One angel records the good deeds of that person's life. The other angel records the bad deeds of that person's life. I said, Ashfaq, let me stop you right there. Is it safe to say that these good deeds are recorded in books? He said, yes. Are these books going to be used in the court of law against that person one day to see whether or not their good deeds outweigh their bad deeds? He says, yes. And I said, well, then you have a replacement religion for Christianity. And they have very much a replacement religion for Christianity. But the Antichrist means in place of Jesus Christ. But if we are to discern the spirit of the Antichrist today in our culture, we have to first of all obviously know the real Christ. Who is Jesus? Fully God and fully man. I'll draw to your attention Philippians chapter 2 verses 5 through 7, where the Apostle Paul said this, have this mindset in you, Philippians, that was also in Christ Jesus, who although He existed in the form of God, thought equality with God not to be grasped, but He emptied Himself, taking the form of man, being fashioned in the likeness of man. It's a very interesting word in verse 6 and 7. Form of God. Form of man. Same word. And it means exact essence or nature. And what Paul was really saying, Jesus was fully God and fully man. So that is challenged all over today in our culture. Now I'm going to date some of us. How many of you with me remember that old television series called To Tell the Truth? Remember? Few of us do. Few of us do. You remember there were 3 panelists up there. 3 people. And it was each one of their jobs to confuse the audience. But there was one real deal. You know, will the real so-and-so please stand up? Well, we need to ask that the real Jesus please stand up. We need to present the real Jesus when we're comparing the biblical Jesus, fully God, fully man, to the smorgasbord Jesuses that are out there in our culture. Folks, I physically hurt sometimes trying to look down the road, and I'm not the prophet nor the son of one, but I don't have to be a prophet in order to discern the times and the way our culture is headed. I physically hurt seeing what's coming ahead and knowing that my children and grandchildren are growing up in this. The issue of truth, personified in the historical person of Jesus Christ, God the Son of God, is never more questioned, has never been more questioned than it is today. And the structures are caving in on the person of Christ. We need to uphold the biblical Jesus. The best way to understand the biblical Jesus, I've found over the years, is to contrast him to a lot of the smorgasbord Jesuses that are out there. And we live in a day and age, many of us can think back just a few decades ago when perhaps Christianity was the only faith kid on the block. Well, that's not the case anymore. We live in a very, very much multicultural society. Multiculturalism breeds religious pluralism. There's all kinds of religions today. And the best way to do this is to contrast the biblical Jesus to some of those that are out there. For instance, what about the Jesus, let's just take, before we get to a handout you have there, let's take the Jesus of postmodernism. I think that's a good way to start. The Jesus of postmodernism says this: well, I believe that Jesus was a good man. He did a lot of good stuff, but don't come in here with this business that he's God. He was a good man and a great teacher, but he's not God. Do you find any flaw in that? I do. First of all, if you believe that he was a great teacher, you ought to look at what he taught, especially about himself. And every time he made a claim, he prefaced that claim with the Old Testament divine name for God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the good shepherd. I am the door of life. I am the resurrection and the life. Before Abraham literally sprang into existence, I am the eternally existing one God. It's quite obvious because the Jews picked up stones to kill him. They understood exactly who Jesus was claiming to be, that he claimed to be God. But the postmodern Jesus says, well, he's a great teacher, but he's not God. Well, you ought to look at what he taught. And there is more evidence to support that he is who he said he was by virtue of his bodily resurrection from the dead than any phenomenon known in human history. In other words, if it were all the evidence were entered into a court of law for his bodily resurrection, it would be the epitome of human history as far as evidence is concerned. That's the Jesus that we worship. But there's plenty of Jesuses out there, replacement Jesuses here and there. How about the Jesus of Oprah? Y'all know Oprah? Y'all listen to Oprah? You watch Oprah? You haven't missed a thing. Anyway, I've been watching Oprah for research purposes, but started a long time ago. When I first moved back to Birmingham, we got involved in doing a lot of New Age seminars. And Oprah is a prime example of a pluralist, religious pluralism, more than one. And she's come a long way from her fundamentalist free will Baptist roots in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. At the age of 14, she was impregnated by her uncle on her grandmother's farm. Well, her grandmother was a preacher woman. And it's obvious in research that where Oprah gets her speaking abilities is from her grandmother. Oprah got a journalism scholarship to Tennessee Tech or somewhere up in Tennessee, and she's been climbing the journalistic ladder ever since. And I use a clip of her in teaching on pluralism and the New Age stuff. But she has 3 panelists, and one of which is Betty Eady, a New Age Mormon. One is a trance channeler, an astrologer. And then the other one is an angel book author named Sophie Burnham. And they were discussing about this way to God and that way to God. When a Christian in the audience stood up, this lady, she was very bold. She said, I hear you talking about different ways to approach God, but that contradicts what Jesus said. He said that he is the only way a person can get to God. Well, apparently, that Oprah took offense because she said that's impossible. God is too big for there to be only one way to approach him. Well, at that, her angel book author panelist spoke up and said, yes, God is like the hub in the center of the wagon wheel. And as all of the various spoke from the outside rim lead to the same center, so do all paths, all religions lead to God. she went on to explain. She said, if someone believes that Confucius is God, well, that's special. If you believe that Buddha is God, that's special. Well, she didn't know anything about Buddhism because Buddha found the concept of God to be irrelevant. Buddhism per se is atheistic. But anyway, then she explained, she went on, she said, if you believe that Jesus is God, well, that's special too. Well, see, if she's correct, in our pluralistic culture and society, we'll have to rewrite Jesus' words. He cannot say, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the only God but by me. He'll have to say, I am a way, a truth, a life. And anybody can come to the God of his choice by any means that he wants to. That is a different Jesus. And then, of course, you got the Jesus of Mormonism today, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. How many of y'all had a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness come to your door? Come on, don't be shy. Raise your hand. Okay, for those who did not raise your hand. How many of y'all did not? Y'all haven't had one of those come to your door? Can we get your names and address? We'll send some to you. No, just kidding. Stay put. The average American home is visited some 3 to 5 times every year on Mormon missionaries or Jehovah's Witnesses. But who is the Jesus of Mormonism? You know, every time the commercial is brought to you by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they don't advertise it as much anymore, but they used to all the time. The minute it came on, I knew automatically it was the Mormon Church. Why? Because the commercials are great. You know? And they have a lot of Madison Avenue money that can buy all that. By the way, Ancestry.com and all that is Mormon connected. I hope you'll know that. And when you stay at Marriott Motel, you're going to help contribute to the Mormon Church because the Marriotts were tied about 40% of their finances to the Mormon Church. Not to bind your consciences, I didn't mean to do that, but that is prevalent today. But the Jesus of Mormonism, let me give you the official Jesus. The official Jesus of Mormonism was sexually procreated as a spirit child of Elohim God and one of his many goddess wives on or near a mysterious star-based planet called Kolob. Hello? I mean, where do you find that? Not in the Bible, but you'll find it in their other revelation. The Bible is the only part of their revelation that has errors in it, according to the Mormon Church. Then you got the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, full of great price, and since they have a living prophet today, he could receive one word from Elohim God that would contradict everything all the way back down to Joseph Smith himself. Nature of continuing revelation is here today but gone tomorrow. But Jesus, this Jesus, and no, they're not going to knock on your door and say, hello. We believe that Jesus and Lucifer are brothers. Would you like to sign up? But officially, that's what they call it. In the pre-existence, Jesus and Lucifer were spirit brothers together. Guess what? You and I were their younger spirit brothers and sisters on Kolob. How about that? Now, they're not going to share that with you at the door, but in our apologetic library at ARC, we have an official Mormon source library. We have more sources than the Mormon Church in Birmingham has from their own religion. We've seen people come out of these groups over the years, and they have donated all of their resources to our library. That's the Jesus of Mormonism. The Jesus of Islam is a prophet. He is just a man. The Jesus of Islam is coming back at the judgment according to Islam, and he will set the world straight, especially the Christian church and Christians, as to his identity, that he is not God the Son, nor the Son of God, because in the Muslim's mind it says, oh, Allah had relations with a woman and gave birth to a son. You're bringing deity down to the level of man. That is shirk. That is blasphemy. You cannot do that. Jesus is just a prophet. And He's not the last prophet. Of course, you and I know that Jesus Christ is the last word of God to mankind. That's the author of Hebrews. It says that. To them, Muhammad is God's last word to mankind. It is very much a replacement religion. When Isaac was taken upon Mount Moriah, and he walked up to the mountain with his father Abraham to be sacrificed, Muslims say we've got it wrong. It was not Isaac that was carried up Mount Moriah to be sacrificed. It was Ishmael. All the old covenant promises primarily are to Ishmael and to the Arabic race, not the Hebrew race. That's another seminar. But anyway, then you got the Jesus of Jehovah's Witnesses. Jesus of Jehovah's Witnesses is Michael the Archangel. If he's an angel, he's a creature. He's not God the Son, the Creator. Here's the way it happens. Jesus, Michael the Archangel, before he comes to earth. When he gets to earth, Michael goes on pause 33 years while he becomes Jesus. And at his spiritual resurrection, since he's an angelic being, no bodily resurrection in this, he becomes Michael the Archangel, a different Jesus altogether. And we've already talked about the Jesus of postmodernism. But the Jesus of the New Age movement. What is the New Age movement? Actually, it gets its name from the astrological chart, astrology. For a New Ager, time divided up into about 2,000-year increments. And for the last 2,000 years, up until recently, the last 2,000 years or so, everybody has been in the fish symbol age, the Piscean fish symbol age, which symbolized the Judeo-Christian church age to the New Age. But just recently, there's been a paradigm shift of life and reality, they say. I'm going to date some of us again. Y'all remember that musical song years ago? 50 years ago. The fifth dimension. It is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And Jupiter aligns with Mars. Peace guides our planet. Well, what you do is you come out of an age, according to them, the Judeo-Christian church age, which separates the personal God apart from creation. He's not it, it's not Him. But the Piscean age knows no distinction. It is the same worldview. Hinduism, Zen Buddhism, Taoism, pronounced with the D but spelled with a T, which is a monistic, distinctionless worldview. All is one, one is all. All is one and one is all. Where are the distinctions? And what happens is the New Age movement through paganism, same worldview, it robs God of His rightful worship, strips Him of His divine nature, and then applies divinity to creation. That's what Wicca is all about. Witchcraft. Wicca, by the way, don't make the mistake of telling a Wiccan that he or she or it, by the way, is worshiping Satan. Now, you and I know that that's the bottom line, right? But Wicca is not Satanism. Satanism is not Wicca. Those are two different religions. Satanism is the worship of a being named Satan. Wicca is a nature worship. It is worshiping the earth. And that is what paganism is all about every day. But the New Age movement, the Jesus of New Age movement, is simply a man who reached a certain level of consciousness and he realized that he is God. And you and I can do the same thing. Because if all is one and one is all, everybody still maintains a spiritual appetite. So let's just call that God. We're into Eastern pantheism. All is God, God is all. I'm God, you're God. So we can do the same thing that Jesus did. Now, knowing that there's probably a trap door that opens at 11 o'clock here, and looking at the clock, I'm already almost an hour over time. It's about 12 o'clock right now. I better wrap up with the last one. But I'd be remiss, and we By the way, we haven't even scratched the surface on this. I just made mention of things. I'd be totally remiss if I didn't share with you, perhaps, the most popular, global, most popular, different Jesus that there is in the culture, in the world. And unlike Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and 1,000 other groups that espouse a different Jesus outside the church historically has disowned it, but that's a cult. You know. This is inside the church. And to coin a phrase by Merrill Lynch years ago, to know no boundaries, this particular one has cut across all kinds of denominational barriers and distinctions. It is the Jesus of the Word faith movement, or positive confession movement. We know it popularly as the health and wealth gospel, the name it and claim it, the blab it and grab it. This, as someone has said, the name it and frame it. It's that idea of health and wealth. You can be healthy, wealthy, and wise based on the amount of faith that you have. In other words, if you have enough faith, you should never be sick. If you have enough faith, you should never be poor. Let's face it. If you have enough faith, you should never have a problem at all. Matter of fact, if you have enough faith, you don't even need God. What happens in this movement, surfacely, is that people have faith in their own faith. You see. And all of that is on the surface. But in order to understand why so much emphasis can be placed on those surface areas, you have to look at what this movement teaches on the key essentials of Orthodox Christianity. Who God is, man, Christ, salvation. Believe you me, they have distorted every bit of it. If I had to point to one particular issue that led me out of the pastorate into apologetic ministry, it is this right here. 1975, I've been 1 year old in the Lord, I think, or 2 years old. I came across the teaching of Kenneth Copeland. I really dove into it. Is it biblical to mention names? Excuse me. It is biblical to mention names. Paul said that Hymenaeus and Philetus were responsible in carrying the faith of some down. He mentioned Alexander the coppersmith that hounded him from place to place. Paul said, matter of fact, Paul said he did him much harm. And Paul pronounced an underhanded blessing on old Alexander. He said, may the Lord reward him for his works. Well, we're not going to do that. But to do what I'm doing and naming names and speaking out on this, and by the way, I've done upwards to about 8,000 seminars in this. I've been over the pond in a number of directions, asked to come and separate a lot of this. And this is very, very serious. The Jesus of all these guys, Kenneth Copeland was a disciple of Kenneth Hagin, Kenneth Creflo Dollar. How about that for a good name for this ministry? Health and Wealth Gospel, the Dollar. Creflo Dollar is a disciple of Kenneth Copeland. You have Joyce Meyer, and I know I've just stopped preaching and gone to meddle. Joyce Meyer teaches that you and I are little gods by nature. If you don't believe that, I've got about 4 tons of research on it. That's what we're in business doing, researching these things. Now, but at any rate, the Jesus of these teachers in this movement, now they will tell you that Jesus is fully God, fully man. The Trinity, God, only one God by nature, triune in personality. But here's the difference. Their Jesus, who is God the Son, fully God, fully man, when God the Son gets to earth, He lays aside His divine nature and walks and ministers on the earth just as a man. That's the teaching of most of the teachers in this movement. And I don't know how many conversations I've had with people in and out of the movement. I said, why do you believe it? Well, we know that Jesus was tempted. And we know that God can't be tempted, and neither does God tempt any man. So He obviously had to lay aside His divine nature in order to be tempted in His human nature. I said, wait, you just told me that Jesus is fully God, fully man. And which one of those natures Was he tempted? Well, he was tempted in his human nature. I said, okay, he's not tempted in his divine nature, just as human nature. Why does he have to lay aside his divine nature in order to be tempted in his human nature? I said, you know what that would be equivalent to? That'd be equivalent to God ceasing to exist. God dying. God couldn't die if he wanted to. And at that, some of them say, oh yes, he can. He can do anything he wants. No, he can't. God can't do anything. He can only do that which is consistent with his eternal divine nature. It'd be totally inconsistent with his eternal divine nature to have that nature be laid aside. But if God the Son, who has always been God the Son, who will always be God the Son, wants to take to himself in time, space, and history, a little over 2,000 years ago, a second nature in a physical body, and have that nature in that body walk on this earth, minister on this earth, be tempted on this earth, then go to the cross and die, and with his own divine nature, raise his own human nature from the grave, he can do that. And that's exactly what he did. You might say, well, I thought it was the Father that raised Jesus from the grave. He did. I thought it was the Spirit that raised Jesus from the grave. He did. Well, how about Jesus raising Jesus from the grave? He did. You don't believe me? John chapter 2, verse 19 and following. Religious leaders are arguing with Jesus. They said, we don't like what you're doing. Show us a sign of your authority. He said, okay, I'll show you a sign. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. They said, sure. It took us 46 years to build this temple. You're going to take it down and put it back up in 3 days? Of course, he was speaking of the temple of his body. Bodily resurrection. But notice what Jesus did not say. Take it down 3 days later. My Father will raise it up. Take it down 3 days later. The Spirit will raise it up. No, take it down. I will raise it up. And who but God can raise the dead? Now the truth is, because you have to separate the persons of the divine Trinity, but you cannot separate the one nature that is God. You cannot dissect it up and say, okay, Father, you get a third of it. Son, you get a third. Spirit, you get a third. No. It's 1 times 1 times 1 equals 1. All three of them were operative in raising the physical body of Jesus from the grave. This Jesus, the one who said before Abraham was, I am. Every time he made a claim, he was claiming to be God in the flesh. That's the Jesus that we worship. Not the Jesus of an idea that's Christian Science. Not the Jesus who is just a man, that's Mormonism. Not the Jesus who's an angelic being, Jehovah's Witnesses. We worship the one and true God, Jesus Christ, in Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is the Jesus that deserves our every ounce of devotion. This is the Jesus that dropped the blinders from your eyes and birthed you into His kingdom. I like to role play with people, and I know the trap door is holding right now. But then we're going to finish in just a second. But I like to role play sometimes with people. I tell people, I am saved by works. And you ought to see the Christians start shaking their heads. I said, oh yes, I am. I just did not tell you whose works they were. They're not mine. They're Jesus' works. They're His. And I receive it as a free gift. The Jesus of Scriptures is fully God and fully man. We worship Him in spirit and in truth. So, Father, we thank You for Your great love for us and how You have so beautifully demonstrated that love, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Help us, Father. Give us this day minds of discernment and hearts of compassion, that You might use us to make a difference. We ask it in Christ's name for His sake.